Look.
It's all good. No, it's all good.
Oh, it's all good.
It's all good.
Thank you.
Okay.
To whom shall we drink?
Okay, to
To
puppetry. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah, right.
So we are good. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, here in the Studio Theater at the Yukon Dramatic Arts Department. And behind us is the Mobius space, which was designed by the late Jerry Rojo after he came up from New York City working with a performance group with Richard Schechner and developing environmental theater. My name is John Bell. I'm the director of the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry. To my right is Peter Schumann, the director of the Bread and Puppet Theater, which is here in a residency leading to performances this Saturday and Sunday of the Persians. And to Peter's right, Amelia Castillo, Bread and Puppet puppeteer, originally from Santiago, Chile, who's been working with the theater for a number of years. And I invited her to be here in case Peter says something that isn't true. Huh? Okay. This is one of our puppet forums. We haven't done a puppet forum with live people in the audience for about 2 years. So this is the first time that we're doing a puppet forum with people in the audience. And also it's a lunchtime puppet forum. I wanted to try to keep this just to an hour because after this, Peter's gonna go to our colleague, Dr. Matthew Cohen's shadow puppet class at the Puppet Arts Complex on the Depot campus. And then he has to finish painting a giant backdrop that we just realized needed to be painted last night. And then there's rehearsals outdoors in the sunshine. So what else do I want to say? This has been a really busy time for the Ballard Institute. My colleague Emily Wicks and Stoff Shear, our graduate assistant, and Anthony Salido and others finished a big filming project for an educational Feel Your Best Self project in Hamden. And opening this weekend is Connecticut Repertory Theater's production of Little Shop of Horrors in the Nafe Catter Theater. And we have like a not a 2-for-1 ticket deal, but we have a reduced ticket price deal with massive marketing underway right now. I should mention that The Persians is being performed this Saturday and Sunday at 4 p.m. in the South Campus lawn. And for information about the tickets, it might even be that my colleague Emily is like dropping in knowledge on the stream that's being streamed over the web stream. So this event is sponsored by the Environmental Theater Committee, which started here in the Dramatic Arts Department in part to try to think about what to do with this space, because it's kind of a historical landmark coming from out of a time in the 60s when Jerry Rojo and Richard Schechner and Brooks McNamara were thinking about environmental theater. And Jerry had designed environments for the performance group. And later, after he came here, he did a lot of set design for the Wilma Theater in Philadelphia, where a lot of Bread and Puppet shows have been done. And I noticed, Peter, and that you once described the domestic resurrection circuses at Goddard College as environmental theater. And I wondered if at that point back in the day, if you were thinking of the movement that Rojo and Schechner and Brooks McNamara were part of.
I must say, no, I didn't. I think I thought of the opposite. We started outdoor theater and street theater in consequence of the fancy new tendencies of theater, which were meant for very little clubs of intellectuals and aficionados. and didn't go in the street. And so our decision was, because of that, we need to be in the street. There's nobody out there. So we designed shows that were quick enough to run away from the cops, that we translated into Spanish as we did them, because the Lower East Side was full of newly arrived Spanish-speaking Puerto Ricans mostly, etc. So no, we were not part of this mostly indoor design scene in New York. No. Shucks.
Okay, thank you.
Point one.
So, so maybe the, the, the quotation I'm thinking of is from many years ago, but what does the term environmental theater or mean something to you in terms of bread and puppet work?
Well, it could, because after all, environment is a very large term applicable definitely to landscapes. And if you put a piece of theater in the landscape to the point where we say to our audiences, well, the main spectacle naturally is the clouds, you know. So we give you a little decorative underneath the cloud scene that you can abandon anytime for the larger spectacle that's with you all the time. And in that landscape in which we live, that is a true forever big 360-degree horizon spectacle.
Maybe I'll ask Amelia as the young artist. Like, I don't know what your experience was before working with Bread and Puppet. I don't know if you did outdoor theater or environment, but what is your experience of, especially with Bread and Puppet, been in terms of working in these kinds of spaces that Peter described?
Well, I would agree with Peter, not necessarily the clouds, but everything, the grass and the sun that sort of comes out at a specific time without you planning on it, and the birds that fly by. Also, we sort of we do shows in all kinds of weather conditions, and I would say only stop at heavy rain. So often sort of the rain, the promise of rain, the light rain that becomes heavy rain in the middle of the show are also sort of
the fear of rain.
yeah, the fear of rain are all really interesting parts of the show. And I think some of the rain shows have been very powerful when the audience sees that we're sort of sticking to it, and they're also getting wet, but they stick to it too. And some beautiful moments occur.
So yeah, and another aspect of environment and environmental theater is well, one of it is subject matter, and Bread and Puppet's done shows about, say, Chico Mendes, the Brazilian logger and environmental activist. There have been shows, The Uprising of the Beast was a giant show about Mother Earth and the environment as an actant who was sort of pissed off at the human race for messing things up. If I can, that's not really how it was described, but so environment is a subject for a lot of shows, but also it appears in my mind with the materials that Bread and Puppet uses. You know, as puppeteers, we're always engaged in materials, and materials define so much of what we do. So I, in my own experience working with Bread and Puppet and looking at the puppets now, the choice of materials involves reused cardboard boxes and bed sheets, reused hotel bed sheets you've been using, and also for rods and wood, going out in the Vermont woods where you live and using wood from the environment. And even earlier than that, I know there's footage from this early 60s film that Jules Rabin shot of you and others getting clay out of the sort of flat marshlands of New Jersey. So I wondered how you think of environment in terms of the materials that you use for puppets.
Pretty good point, right? The clay, the sticks, yeah, that's what it is. The cardboard boxes, the industrial landscape that blesses us with a lot of toss outs that are incredibly valuable materials. You can dip a cardboard box into water and take it apart into its layers, and it makes powerful material. Just cook a little cornstarch, apply it over the clay mold, let the sun, invite the sun in it, a little wind on it, and take it off, and you have a sculpture that's strong and lasting. It can be tossed around because it's lightweight. So it has great advantages over ceramics or cast plaster things and so forth.
For a while, Bread and Puppet used a lot of, like when I started working with the company, fiberglass and celastic. And I think you told me a little while ago that the puppeteer Jim Henson had introduced you to celastic, that material, which turns out to be sort of the solvent acetone that's used to soften that plastic impregnated fiber turns out to be carcinogenic. So and the Brett Theater no longer uses it. But what's my question?
For a bunch of years.
Yeah.
We used to, so Jim showed me how to utilize this stuff, and the big advantage was you didn't have to be afraid of rain. You could take it outdoors, all that. But naturally, the bad effect of acetone, smelling it and touching it with your fingers and so on is miserable. So we were very happy to have a friend, Andy Capon,
Yeah.
who came from an area where the big cardboard factories are. And he knew how cardboard was made, namely with rolls of paper and cornstarch. And so we learned that, and ever since we have used that material. And it's doesn't matter. We have taken it into downpours and what have you. Some of it breaks down in the downpour, can be repaired. And if you paint it well enough, actually, the risks are minor.
Amelia, what's your experience of materials with Bread and Puppet Theater? And I realize I don't know your puppet theater this much, different type of approach.
Well, at the time that I've been with the theater, we was post Scholastic, and so like Peter mentioned, cardboard is the main thing. And I guess the only thing I would say is like we have our techniques that we use at the farm, but then when we travel, sometimes we give workshops in different places, sometimes other countries, and then we sort of have to change the way that we work a little bit because cardboard is very available here, but it's not necessarily available in the same way in Haiti or El Salvador. And so, I guess part of the technique or the culture of working is sort of working with what you have. So the materials Peter mentioned are available to us in Vermont, but we sort of improvise with whatever is around.
Related to this, I think is sort of the decay of materials. And I remember at the first sort of version, or maybe it was the second version, if the first version of a Bread and Puppet Museum was in Delancey Street in the loft there. But at Kate Farm, the beginnings of a Bread and Puppet Museum, I think you called it the art of impermanence because it was all paper mache. And like, especially like some of the puppet art students here were helping repair some of the puppets that are used in the Persians. There's a definite amount of impermanence and decay going on there. So I wondered what your thoughts were, Peter, about that, like working with these materials that so often deteriorate in your hands while you're performing. No, I'm being facetious, but that you're not interested in, it seems, in, sparkling, brand new, undented puppets.
Well, puppets have no rights You know, we brutalize them all the time. You know, they get mishandled, they get thrown into boxes, they get tossed around, they get packed densely together more than they should and so on. A lot of their decay stems from poor packing methods. At the end of the big circuses in Glover, we used to do a burning day where we build a big sculpture from just all the decaying uh, elements of that year's production and make it into a spectacular fire and probably hot dogs with it or something, I don't know. But yeah, that's how it goes. You lose a lot, but that's fine. You couldn't store everything we make anyway. So storage is difficult. The barns have often areas where moisture collects, and that's an enemy of paper mache. So mold comes into play, all that kind of stuff. Naturally, yeah.
Can I say, Peter, sometimes you like the gargoyles, for example, when they're
Yeah.
falling apart.
I love beaten up characters. Yeah.
Because some people make puppets and they want it to look really nice and it really.
No, they have to show, no, they have to show their beaten upness and their crinkled noses and their smashed in foreheads and all that. It's all part of their character. Yeah.
I know from our collections at the Ballard Institute, some of the hand puppets, like the old Punch and Judy hand puppets, the wooden ones, it's routine that the noses are knocked off, you know,
Yeah.
and they're flat or they're replaced.
Yeah, because they were brutal. You know, those Caspars, they go bang, hit on the head and the nose comes through. Yeah.
The Persians is, I think it's one of the first recorded tragedy by the playwright Aeschylus. It was written in 472 BC. And in the program for the show, you write sort of eloquently about why you wanted to do that show. So I guess it's two questions. One is why the Persians now? And also what attracts you to the dramaturgy and theatrical techniques of Greek theater? We originally wanted to do this in the Padea Center Greek Amphitheater, which is not finished yet or open for use. And then Bread and Puppet has its own, when you look at it, sort of unnaturally created version of a Greek amphitheater. So one question is, what attracts you to the nature of Greek tragedy? And then secondly, what attracted you to doing the Persians right now?
Well, the Aeschylus is a special case in Greek theater. Euripides and Sophocles, that's pretty well-known material in classical European performances in America as well. Aeschylus is a totally different shtick. Aeschylus is directly descendant from the Dionysian rites, from Dionysian services, from Dionysian relationship to nature and to divinities that had to be defined. It's a totally different story. And the particular case of Aeschylus writing about the Persians is, it's really interesting because Aeschylus himself was a veteran of Darius's first big war against Greece, which he also didn't succeed with. But then Xerxes, his son, rounded up all the empire forces from many, many countries and wanted to finally get rid of that Greek little rebel country, tiny country compared to the Persian Empire's vast countrysides. And so he rounded them all together. And the Greeks had this very smart general, Themistocles, and they lured the Persian giant ships into straits where they couldn't really maneuver. Anyway, very amazingly, that this tiny Greek army totally eliminated the Persian army. Then the Athenian authorities went to their most famous poet of their time, Mr. Aeschylus, and said, now we need a victory play. Please write us a victory play. And Aeschylus wrote the victory play. And the victory play doesn't even mention Themistocles, doesn't even mention any Greek hero of destruction, not a single one. It's only about the slaughtered arch enemy. Every name that's mentioned is a noble family from Persia. Every slaughter is recorded. And it's all a giant lament for the widows and the mothers and daughters, sons of this gigantic gathering of warriors. It's an amazing play. There's nothing in the history of playwriting that comes close to that. When it goes, when you think of it, war, how is war represented? How is war glorified? How is war used in drama? Yeah, it is being glorified. And here it's the exact opposite. And when you see it, you will realize how incredibly, amazingly, yeah, I think Mr. Aeschylus came around the corner and saw what's happening right now, and he wrote it yesterday. That's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah, I think like yesterday when we had the first rehearsal with the volunteers, you said something along the lines of, this needs to be done now, or something like
Indeed,
that.
yeah, it needs to be done now. Yeah, this where one empire plays its cards against the other empire, and this here empire, which is the real vicious empire, can point to another empire and say how evil they are because of what they are doing, totally forgetting that they just slaughtered 900,000 Afghans and Iraqis and are bombarding Yemen as we speak. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, you have a wide-ranging sense of these effects of war and our own United States involvement in such organized violence.
Yeah, I must say, yes. You can avail yourself easily of the Jeremy Kale that just interviewed Noam Chomsky. It's available. You can find it on your machine, I'm sure. And it's a very good historical overview of these latest, like 50 years of aggressions.
I notice in your the recent show, Finished Waiting, at the very beginning, there's these big paper mache wings and words Ukraine are taped on through this process that the puppeteers go through to make the words go through, but also Yemen and also Afghanistan and also Palestine. So
Yeah.
you're looking at a wide range of experiences of war. Maybe I'll continue along that line, and Amelia, if you can jump in with thoughts. I think we're having this course about bread and puppet theater here at the Puppet Arts program, which is really interesting. And I've always noticed that your early work reflects opposition to war and suspicion of patriotism. I think this vertical cranky that you made at Putney, World War III, I think, has that, and that was even before I think you and the bread and puppet work became engaged with anti-Vietnam War activism. But I was thinking about this immediate environment of war and the nature of politics and art. And so I was thinking of, I wanted to mention a bread and puppet collaborator, Jasmila Žbanić, who directed this film, Quo Vadis Aida, a 2020 film about the massacre of 8,000 Muslim men by Serbian forces in 1995. And you met her when you were in Sarajevo, besieged city of Sarajevo in 1993 and 1994. I just listened to a biography of Susan Sontag, who also went to Sarajevo during that time, and she did a production of Beckett's Waiting for Godot. And you were there at the Haris Pasovich's theater festival doing a production. Anyway, Yasmila was a high school student there and worked in those workshops. And she came to Glover for the summer of 1995. And after, when the massacre at Srebrenica happened, and she said that that you and Elke Schumann encouraged her to make a fact-based outdoor production based on that that thing that had immediately happened in her country. Um,
And
she
so she did.
and she did. She made a traveling show about a woman who was so distraught over her husband's death that she drowned herself and her two children and used like a women's chorus singing I want to say Balkan, but Eastern European music. In an interview with John Kalish, reporter, she said, "For me, it was very important to see that politics and art can be joined in something beautiful and powerful, because many times you hear that art is maybe damaged if it's talking about politics in a direct way. But in Bread and Puppet, I learned how art can still talk about urgent issues of our time." She didn't get the Academy Award she was nominated for, but she's considered to be one of the great filmmakers in Europe right now. But I wondered how you think about Yasmila Schwanik's approach and this influence of Bread and Puppet on her work, and this idea of, you know, that concept that art is maybe damaged if it's talking about politics in a direct way. That's a long question.
Yeah, it's a nice long. But Yasmila, you can see her film, I believe. It's coming to the States, I believe. It's called Aida, and it's a really powerful filming of that event of Srebrenica, of what happened there, and the total failure of the UN as protective military force inside the Yugoslavia and totally failing to be active. I think the main mandate of the forces, the people who I met when I worked in Sarajevo, there it was pretty obvious that their mandate was really self-protection and not protecting the elements of the population. So it was a fake UN presence there that was meaningless, that was very disturbing. They went around in bulletproof vehicles and were safe, whereas the rest of the folks who came to my workshop often enough had to rush through sniper fire to get there. So yeah, it was a pretty incredibly inhumane situation. People trying to get water, for example, standing in line at the brewery in Sarajevo to get a glass of water or a jug of water and being sniped at while standing in line for water. You know, that was the situation. And then cooking was done in, so they always offer you tea when you tea or coffee when you go to personal, and there's, you take a look at how they get that stuff. You don't want it anymore. So horrible. They took baths in this much water. They showed how to do that.
In one of your other an essay you wrote, or a manifesto perhaps, you talked about Bread and Puppet doing, I don't have the words right, political theater, and sometimes it being, I forget what word to use. I want to say like propaganda or agitprop, and sometimes being different than that, or sometimes being effective, sometimes being not effective. I'm not wording this well, but what for you is a good a good puppet show that involves political stories or perspective?
Yeah, I don't know to answer that.
Okay.
No, I mean, we are slogan mirrors. We make slogans, all the time. We are not interested in the gorgeous, fantastic assemblage of available European drama and so forth, even though there's such wonderful things in there. We want to make things that are directly applicable to the time we live in, to what we do right now, and to, well, that's why we invite Mr. Aeschylus to join us. Yeah, and he does.
You said you talked about slogans, but sometimes your slogans are pretty abstract, like about essentialism and non-essentialism, or it's not like a political slogan that you'd
Well,
find.
the world provides us with the slogans, right? Remember when COVID started, they made a wonderful new discovery that there are essentialist people, essential people, and non-essential people. We are proud to be non-essentialists, Essential is a truck driver and the hot dog provider, and we are very definitely not neither of them. We are non-essentialists, and we want to be there. If the essentialist culture does what it does, what it shows it does, we don't want to be part of it as much as possible, not be part of it, and do it outside of that culture.
But because art is not essential or puppetry is not essential, is that a sort of a
Yeah.
freedom?
In the sense that how the definition was provided to us, indeed, we are non-essentialists, proudly so, yes.
Amelia, I wanted to ask you about your sense of political theater and political puppet theater. And in a way, again, I did talk to you before, but coming from Chile, which has its own complicated history of politics and repression and art, like how do you experience and think about the way that bread and puppet theater approaches political issues?
Well, it sort of doesn't surprise me that Peter doesn't want to answer the question, because I feel like it gets answered in different and often contradictory ways. And sometimes we're making a show and Peter says, no, you're beating the audience over the head. You don't need to say that. And sometimes he's like, saying, no, you need to beat them over the head with it. So it sort of seems to change in the way that politics comes into our shows. Like you said, sometimes it's very abstract and maybe it's a wordless show, and it's beautiful and it's more sort of like a ritual. And I would say it's still political, but then sometimes it could be a circus act, which includes a lot of very specific information about an event like Srebrenica that you mentioned, or about something happening in Chile. So it seems like the answer shifts, and I don't know why it does, or sort of why things fall into a certain place at a certain time.
Good luck.
Is it because the context, like the different contexts, the different moments at different times call for different types of responses?
Good luck. Need a lot of good luck to do it like they do in the thing, and you get divine interferences. Like when the Bishop woman, there's a rainy day, horrible rainstorms, and the Washer women come out with a sign that says, "Let the sun shine," and the sun comes up.
Yes. That was a notable moment during a bread and puppet pageant, I think maybe in the 80s or 90s.
Used to be called divine interference.
Not intervention, but interference. Yes, which happens with being in the environment and doing shows there. Go ahead.
I guess I would just add that maybe a part of it is like not being afraid of doing bad shows, of making bad theater, and and making boring theater too. Like not wanting to do it on purpose, but not being afraid if it happens. Yeah.
Good idea. Bad theater is a very good idea.
So speaking of theater, I wanted to think about acting a little bit. Well, bread and puppet, like in this show, for the volunteer call, it said no experience necessary. So anybody can be involved, right? And on the other hand, you have very experienced and talented puppeteers like Amelia, performers, or Tom Cunningham in the audience, or Tori Lynn Francis in the audience. And who else is there? I don't know. Ziggy McKenzie there. and acting and puppetry have a really interesting relationship. Like the show, The Little Shop of Horrors right now, it involves acting and also puppets. When I think about Bread and Puppet, I think of some really great actors, straight head actors who've worked with the theater, like George Bartenieff, who studied with Erwin Piscator, the great German director, and also worked with the Living Theater with Judith Malina for a long time. I think of Margot Lee Sherman, a longtime Bread and Puppet actor from the New York acting scene. Fred Newman, who played Othello in your, what is it called? Shakespeare in the Pasture? No, Shakespeare, it was Shakespeare Company you had. And Fred was a famous actor interpreter of Samuel Beckett's plays, off Broadway and Broadway, worked with this company, Mabou Mines, a very famed New York City company. And also, well, Geneviève Yuyas, who in addition to working with Bread and Puppet Theater a lot, has a solid career working in various Paris theaters, doing very different types of acting, not puppet work, but sort of straight ahead realistic acting and sort of activist context. And then I think of times when traditional actors like Kwang Yu-feng's teacher from Taiwan, who specialized in Monkey King roles in Beijing opera, he was in circus one year. So there is a space for acting. It seems to me there's a place for acting in Bread and Puppet, but what kind of acting or performance techniques are needed for the work of puppet theater in Bread and Puppet contexts?
Pretty much none whatsoever. But I want to point out to you, look at COVID, how interruptive, how powerfully that disrupted all this performing in our culture. And at Bread and Puppet, it turned out to be totally possible in the landscape, and because of the fact that so many people in the community assisted it. There were people who came just in order to keep people at distance from each other. There were people who came just to inspire people to wear masks till they were seated at a distance from each other. There were people who just came to park people in a proper place. Many of them, all summer long, continuously. One of them, Katya, came every time with a different mask and a different outfit, but doing a big performance out of this ushering job and making it attractive, not only to herself, but to the people who were there. So this communal involvement, how many kids are in it? Even under COVID, how many kids participate? How many moms with those kids, etc. It was only possible because of the tradition of having done so for many years beforehand already, to have it embedded in that area's community, even though most people who started working with us are now grandmas and what have you, and that aren't available anymore. And the families are dispersed. But then new ones come in and it does continue.
That sense of that community support of Bread and Puppet is and openness to people stepping into parades or shows like the Persians. That's a really strong and a powerful aspect of the theater. But I maybe I'll ask Amelia about acting. I don't know if you had acting history, but Amelia, you're a very one of the talented, proficient, skilled performers of Bread and Puppet shows. What do you have thoughts about the nature of performing in Bread and Puppet shows? What that requires?
Well, I would say we often perform outside and unamplified. So that is a skill. Either you're willing to yell and lose your voice, which sometimes we do, or you find a way to be able to not lose your voice and do it on a tour every day for 6 days a week. So yeah, And also, I guess, and this is true of all live theater, and maybe more true in the kind of theater that we do, like stuff goes wrong all the time, and because our objects are decaying, as you mentioned before, because we not only are they decaying, but we're exposing them to the weather. So we had a performance the other day, and the cantastorias were blowing and sometimes falling from where they were supposed to land. So being able to sort of continue doing a show under those changing circumstances, and with objects that are not necessarily behaving the way that you expected them to. And
Yeah, we suffer from disobedient objects. They're amazingly autonomous. Disobedient.
yeah, and also I guess a lot of the shows have narrators, so you're not really playing a role, but you are in relationship to a text, and often to a banner, and also sort of a kind of host to the audience. So often Peter's notes are, speaking slower, leaving more space between the words, and sort of he never says, be present or anything like that. I think Peter, the director, thinking about acting often, because he's working with non-actors, and with people with very varying degrees of acting experience, he never asks you to do something that you're not able to do. But when he notices that there's something missing, and there often is, he'll add something to sort of support you. So one of the first shows that I ever did, I had to sing by myself, and I was replacing somebody who had been doing it before, who was very confident, and I wasn't. And so instead of saying, you have to be more confident or you have to practice, he said, oh, you need a drone, somebody to, sort of drone with you. And it helped. And so I think, yeah, that's something that I enjoy in working with Peter, is sort of being helped to do what is needed without asking something that I'm not able to do.
Thank you. Now, I wanted to ask a more historical question. Like I've been thinking a lot in the past few years, Peter, about how your work continues to reflect your own initial approaches to dance and sculpture, which is I think is a way of thinking about where you started, from the Musach puppet theater in Germany. Musach is a town outside of Munich where you were working with Elke and others. Thinking about those initial approaches, but also the kinds of work generated in the 1960s when you started Bread and Puppet Theater in New York City. I'm thinking, for example, of how at the beginning of the work on the Persians last June, you used the word a happening as what we were going to create, a happening, which is coming from the 60s art events. And I'm also thinking about how at a time when I worked with Bread and Puppet Theater and we would go to New York City, we would run into the playwright Maria Irene Forness at Theater for the New City, and you seem to have a relationship, a friendly relationship with her and her dog and her mother, who were always with her. And also choreographer Steve Paxton, an inventor of contact improv, who's going to work on a project you're doing, I think, in a few weeks in Glover. I think of dancers like Irene Pasloff, who was involved with a lot of downtown New York dance, and I'm not thinking of the other names of those dancers. Also Judith Molina, the director of the Living Theater, and Crystal Field and George Bartenieff, I mentioned. That was the time when, Jerry Rojo, whose work is behind us, was also active. So what do you consider to be abiding influences of that time in your work?
Well, all these names, Mama Mia, that's, yeah, I'm so glad that this summer I succeeded to ask Steve and Lisa to come, and Malcolm Goldstein, the violinist, to join us in the project we are doing with Concordia students. The project will be an arbitrary title that I picked out of a little book I made recently, a little comic, which is called The Theory of Our Needs. And so making fun of our needs as compared to our wants. And that's going to be subject matter and guideline. But when I started working in the States in 61, I came to the States in 61. I had met Cunningham and Cage in Europe at the dance festival where we, with our company, also performed. And he invited me to his studio. There was a class by Robert Dunn and Steve and Simone Morris and Bob Morris and Remy Charlip. And it was in the same building with the Living Theater, so to learn to know the Becks also in that building. And they were all hacking away at interpretations of John Cage's book, Silence. So they wanted to introduce that to American young choreographers, what to do with these ideas in that book. And I gave some classes there too. And then I tried to get a dance company together. And I couldn't out of this group. But in the street, I met Richard Tyler, who was the super of several buildings on East 4th Street. And he pointed out to me that Klaas Oldenburg was moving out of his apartment and we could have it. It was relatively cheap. I forget, 50 or 60 bucks. And so we moved into there. And then Richard became that guy who was the super of the building. He became the brain of the new company. Him and his friends, they called themselves the Uranian Phalanstery. He appointed people to be ambassadors to the planet Uranus, and they accepted his appointments. And they were also good at pot smoking, and they were also very good at dancing and playing instruments. So we did pot smoking instrumentalizations and very relatively maybe somber dances. We called it the Dance of Death. And we performed it in Judson Church and for a what was called a general strike for peace that was done by the War Resisters League in conjunction with the Living Theater.
65 or 67?
No, that was in 61, 62
Got
in
it.
that first thing. And it sounds grandiose, general strike for peace. So probably 15 people did strike for peace, but it was a wonderful opportunity of getting together with all these strikers for peace and to learn to know the connection between War Resisters League. Grace Paley came into play at that time. The Greenwich Village Peace Center was created at that time. It was a very fantastic moment in the city of New York. And it was the time of all these abstract expressionists doing show openings, and you could go there and get drunk because the wine was free and the cheese was free, and it was wonderful. And but I couldn't get a company out of those people. So the philanthropists became my company.
Great. I think we have time for a couple of more questions. I wanted to ask about collaboration and directing, and Amelia too. It seems to me Bread and Puppet has an interesting mix of your own strong directing style, which we've seen in the past few days, and in directing Amelia and puppeteer Barbara Lieber and others, Uriel Najera, in narrating Cantastories, and what we were doing last night with the volunteers, with choreography, with the mask, the clown masks and the chair dances. You have a strong directing style, but you also involve what's called collective, what's now called collective creation. A lot of these terms that are popular now, like site-specific work and immersive theater and durational theater, those when I think of those terms, when I first heard them, I thought, oh, that's what Bread and Puppet does. But collective creation. How do you think Bread and Puppet balances this collective creation? And I'm thinking of the early days of the Persians, where little groups of people would go off and invent things and come back and present them. How do you think Bread and Puppet balances collective creation and then your presence as a strong and clear director? How does that work?
Well, it works every summer since we are doing the domestic resurrection circuses, because the circuses are a get together of so many different ideas. The people come up with their sketches, they come up with impossible ideas, with possible ideas, with in-between ideas, with good ones, with bad ones, the whole pile of them. And it all gets done. And that togetherness of all of those makes a circus. And it needs the great contrast in that to produce what we call a domestic resurrection circus.
And how do you see that balance? Like like
It's
people,
not balanced.
it's not balanced.
It's unbalanced. No, you never know what you get out of it.
Is it clear to you when you want to say, oh, wait a minute, let's do it this way? Like people bring work that they've created and then, but you form it or change it.
Well, I would try to stay away from the mere kitsch and what they call entertainment industry and all that stuff. No interest. So, see what happens.
I want to get to Amelia too, but I think about your ongoing collaborations with people like Peter Hamburger, a puppeteer who's also a builder and a creator of mechanical devices. That one is a clockworks mechanism that you used in the most recent show, Finished Waiting, but also other large, oversized clockwork mechanical devices or machines attached to the grid of the theater that drop like pieces of paper or long ribbons of like in Honey, Let's Go Home. There's a very interesting collaborative sense you have with him. And I think also of the way you're working with musicians like Matthew Schiffrin right now, who's singing the Erbarme dich aria from Bach's St. Matthew Passion. Those are instances where you're welcoming this work into your show, and it's sort of presented pretty much straightforwardly.
But the great thing in this show is you should all come and be in the show. That's the easiest way to get to what he says.
Some of them are.
Yeah, so the show is easily accessible. It's 2 more rehearsals, I think, and then a dress rehearsal. And it is not only Aeschylus, but the great thing in the show is the marriage of Aeschylus with Johann Sebastian Bach. And Bach in the St. Matthew Passion has this heart-rending aria, and we found a countertenor who can sing it. It's a very hard to sing aria, and we found this young man who does it and can do it, and you will never hear anything like it in your lifetime. It's so unbelievable.
And that you like bring that in, and it has its place surrounded by these other puppets and movements and sounds and texts that complement it in a way.
Yeah, it's a collaboration between Mr. Aeschylus and Mr. Bach, who sat together, they drank a beer together, and then they made that thing.
And you were just hanging out watching it happen.
Drinking my beer.
I wanted to ask Amelia what your experience of Bread and Puppet work is in terms of collective creation and your own initiatives and how that works and how Peter's directing connects with that.
Maybe I'll pass just in the interest of
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
I don't have any yeah, I don't have anything new to add.
The last question then, I'm thinking about painting. Recently, I think since COVID, but your work has always included painting. And, you're sort of, from my experience, your ongoing work includes drawing and woodcuts and painting. That sort of just proceeds like your bread baking, which is always happening, and then together with your sculpting and puppet building and directing. But the paintings have played an increasing, in my mind, role in the work. Here in the Persian show, where the paintings actually come in and move around in the show, or sometimes they're narrated by Amelia and others as cantastorias. And in your recent show, Finished Waiting, the paintings are even more dynamic, arising and dancing around and descending. The woodcuts are moving on the stage. I wondered about why you're interested in those the paintings performing on stage with you now.
Well, the paintings for the last couple of years, I have to blame on my friend Dick Brigham. He's a beekeeper in southern Vermont, and he brought me a load full of discarded bed sheets from the southern Vermont. And when you sit in front of a discarded bed sheet, you figure what's the life in the bed sheet, and you interpret it, and then you paint that on there. So it's all in there. There's a lot of life and death and sickness and ecstasy buried in that bed sheet, invisible before the paint gets smeared on it, and then becoming visible when you smear enough paint on it. So that's what it is.
Okay. Oh, I didn't realize it was that simple. What about narrating? There was an interesting moment in a rehearsal, I think day before yesterday. You were working with Barbara Lieber, and there's some of the paintings. There's an animal with like it's like something coming out of their mouth, and you and Barbara had a stick. This is like traditional cantastoria. Look here, see. And you said, no, do it this way. So the stick goes on the animal's mouth and then goes across. This gesture was very interesting to watch, because you were saying, the gesture of the performer with the painting needs to be a specific way. So how does gesture relate to painting?
Well, in cantastoria, it's a good point. Do you guys know cantastoria, this old-fashioned way of doing New York Times in the world that didn't have New York Times, bringing the news to people? It's a family business usually, and it's having pictures there of well-known events usually, or not so well-known events, and then the pointing of the stick does the whole trick of showing what you have to look at, because a sentence is so and so long, so and so many words, and then the verb to finish it off or whatever. But a pointing stick can do that in a very quick, visual, graphically correct way. You bing, you point there, and the tongue goes from there to there, and you point that out. And it's a fantastic technique that's inherited from these street performers, the cantastoria tellers, which originated both in China and India and traveled over Africa and Asia till they arrived in Europe in the, I think, about 17th century, and then forever got ingrained in European cultures, and very prominent in Italy, Germany, Poland, all over the place.
Is cantastoria a type of puppetry, or is it related to puppetry?
No, it could be. Probably they doubled up often enough as such, but I think basically it's a family business of telling attractive or sensationalistic stories to the public, like the old troubadours did, who traveled around from one court to another and told them the latest news. And that had to be personally experienced at that time. It wasn't some abstract news. It was what they Oh my God, I wish I could recite Wolkenstein
Oh,
for you.
okay. You did yesterday, and I don't know
Und
German.
als
so-
ich war von 10 Jahren alt, da wollte ich sehen, wie die Welt war gestaltet. And when I was 10 years old, I wanted to see what the world was made of. Elend und arm, in manchem Winkel heiß und kalt, poor and miserable, in many a corner, hot and cold, hab ich gehaust bei Christen, Juden, Heiden, did I live with Christians, Jews and Heathens. 3 Pennies in mein 3 Pfennig in meinem Beutel und ein Stückchen Brot, das war von Haus mein Zehrung, als ich kam in Not. 3 pennies in my bag and a piece of bread from home. That was what I took from home when I got into deep trouble. And I spent many a drop of blood thinking often that I would die. And that's his autobiography of Wolfram von Eschenbach, 15th century German traveling artist, one-eyed, huge oeuvre. We did one summer worth of shows of his poetry, highly recommendable if you want to read about pre-Cantastoria time. Yeah.
This idea of traveling the world and telling the news.
Telling the story.
Back in
And
the
so
day.
often, like Wolkenstein, in this one, it's your own life that you tell.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay, so we're reaching the end. Now I want to, Amelia, do you have something brilliant to say to summarize the whole? How about something not brilliant?
Do that.
Something.
Communist Manifesto.
Okay.
You do it, Peter.
And thoughts about performing in the Persians?
Well, maybe just tying it back to what you said before, that I mean, it always amazes me that yes, anybody can do it, and it is highly specialized and specific, and yet people get thrown in, and then we make a show, and somehow it comes together.
And that's what's going to happen this weekend. It'll somehow come together.
No, Mr. Aeschylus is such an inspiration, and so is Mr. Bach. And to bring the two of them together, what a privilege to be able to do that. Just amazing.
And also with this great company from Bread and Puppet, and as of last night, all these really amazing volunteers.
Yeah.
We want to thank Peter Schumann and Amelia Castillo for being here. The next puppet forum will, no? We stopped. Oh, well, I think we want to end so Peter can get lunch and then go to Dr.
next-
Cohen's
next-
event at 2. So I think we'll just make it a little bit shorter this time. Oh, I think my colleague Emily's been asking for, did you get questions? One question. What's your one question? Oh, okay. I don't know if you want to talk about your violin.
Well, and, my violin, I learned as a kid. Then when we became refugees, I lost my fiddle on the way. Then I slowly got one back. By the time I had a violin teacher again, I wasn't interested in classical music anymore. I wanted to improvise. And my teacher, who was a collector of African music instruments, agreed with that. So he supported me in that. So that's how I inherited my way of playing fiddle. So I don't play Bach anymore. I did as a kid and then gave it up under circumstances of war. So.
And how do you use that, for example, in your sermons?
I used to fiddle like moaning and groaning along with my moaning and groaning. State of the world, depression, what have you.
Okay, on that happy note.
On that happy note.
So the next puppet forum is on Thursday, May 19th, 12th. And that will be connected to our Hecho in Puerto Rico, 4 generations of Puerto Rican puppetry. It'll be about the Tito Matos, a reinventor of Puerto Rican plena music and his unfortunate death, and how Pedro Adorno, who worked with Bread and Puppet at a time and has a company with his wife Katy Vigo called Agua Sol y Sereno, how that company did a giant puppet procession with music to commemorate the life of Tito Matos, and how puppetry and plena are part of Puerto Rican culture today. That'll be with Maria Quintero from the University of Puerto Rico, and two colleague from UConn right now, whose name I didn't write down, and then a colleague of Tito Matos's. We hope you'll come to see the Persians this Saturday and Sunday at 4 o'clock, South Campus Lawn. It's not going to rain. You can go online and buy tickets, or there's like a QR code and you go there and then you scan the code and then you do it all online, and it's amazing. So at Peter's still open for volunteers coming. I want to thank.
It's cheaper to come and participate than to buy a ticket.
And then you get to go backstage. Although backstage is, anyone could go backstage. Thank you to Emily Wicks and Anthony Salido for making this happen. Thank you to the Environmental Theater Program in the Dramatic Arts Department and Alexander Woodward. Thanks to all of you for coming, and we'll see you at the puppet show. Thanks.
Yeah.